There. Try it now, Chief Loyal.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Well, again, I apologize for the delay. I wasn't able to log on as quickly as I'd hoped to be able to, but welcome everyone for this evening's meeting. And oh, hello, Dr. Jones. Good to see that you're here. I know things will be well run. So if you are able, if you would join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, it'd be greatly appreciated. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And I know, Kathy, you indicated you have taken the roll call, correct? We're good with the roll call, so let's see here. Dr. Jones, please proceed.
Thank you, Chief. First agenda item, number 2 on your agenda is to review and take or adopt the draft minutes from the last meeting, which was on October the 7th. Are there any corrections or additions to those minutes that were included in your packet? Hearing none, they stand as adopted. Number 3, Kathy, you've already indicated there are no public comments scheduled.
That's correct. And there are no attendees on the call. So we can move forward. Thank you.
So we'll move to agenda item 4, the explanation of the meeting materials. Joe?
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And with the permission of Chair Loyal, I'd just like to veer off the agenda item for just a minute or two and deliver some bad news relative to one of our team members. Stephen Curtis passed away since our last meeting in October. His wife called today to inform the city that he had passed, and she wanted to make sure that you all knew how much he enjoyed being part of the team and how much he looked forward to the meetings and the conversations we all had. So I hate to start things off with some bad news, but I thought it'd be appropriate to let you know sooner than later why Mr. Curtis is not with us tonight. And we certainly extend our sympathy to his wife and his family.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Chair Loyal. As always, it's the department's responsibility to provide you the information you all need to understand what we're trying to achieve at each meeting, and then hopefully achieve it when we all get together because we've given you something that hopefully is helpful. Tonight, the packet is somewhat slim compared to some of our monthly meetings over the last 2 years. As you know, we have approved the minutes. And besides the minutes, the only other item in the packet that is scheduled for discussion tonight is the results of the public input process that the Town Center Update team crafted, authorized, and then handed off to city team members to implement and then provide feedback from to all of you. So that's the primary item of information tonight and the subject of our agenda for discussion. Are there any questions regarding the packet of information? If not, I appreciate your attention. And again, sorry to have to deliver some bad news at the start tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Questions or comments for Joe? Elizabeth?
Not on. Are we going to be discussing parts of this and our reaction to some of the items, Joe?
Yes, ma'am. I think it was the intent of Mr. Newberry, Ms. Arnett, and I to kind of highlight some of the responses we received, and those primarily where the yes and no votes were fairly close. I think those are the ones that the team members should probably pay special attention toward. And then we can have a discussion if there's any changes to the recommendation the team has made relative to those items. Some are fairly clear, like there's 90% support. I don't know if we need to spend much time there, but certainly we can go through each of the 24 questions if the team would like to.
Other thoughts from the team before we head into the report? Elizabeth again?
Yes, are we allowed to jump around, or do you want us to go through it, or how do you want us to begin?
Joe?
Well, with the permission of the chair and moderator, I was going to just provide a brief summary on at least 5 of the 24 questions I think that had what I would consider less than consensus on. And hopefully we could start there with those 5. And then thereafter, again, with the permission of the chair and the moderator, if there are any other questions on the others, then we would take them one at a time.
That seems reasonable.
Thank you,
Thank
Deb.
you.
You're loyal?
I agree completely. Please proceed.
Well, with chair's permission and Dr. Jones, I first want to just give you some background on the process. I know that many of you understand what we did, but as you know, through the past 2 years, we've ended up with about 27 recommendations or decisions. 2 of those related to specific zoning requests that were forwarded to the Town Center Update team from the Planning and Zoning Commission. Those have been processed on to City Council. And so for the most part, those were eliminated from the public input process. There have been ample opportunities for public input on those particular 2 zoning requests as well. Thereafter, the Town Center Update team agreed that we would formulate a public input survey through SurveyMonkey, and that we would, as team members, create a survey instrument that was included a short video as an introduction, and then graphics with the assistance of Julie and Jacqueline for our mapping component that would hopefully provide a good explanation to anyone that would participate in the survey. The survey had, I believe, 770 responses. Not all were complete surveys, but certainly I think 500 plus, Kathy?
Actually, more than 600 were complete,
600.
maybe 618 about, but yeah.
So over 600 were completed by those that participated. So it's certainly not a scientific survey. Again, we did our best to ensure that we gave you clean results from what we could determine. And then there are also the open-ended questions, which generated a lot of comments, which I thought was very, very positive. And the comments come from all perspectives, positive, middle ground, and certainly some negative ones as well. And all of them are important to the process. I think it adds the character to what we've done and allows people to understand the direction that the team was hoping to go. I do want to acknowledge again that it was a joint effort in terms of the survey and the report. Travis Newberry, Kathy Arnett, Julie and Jacqueline all were integral in creating the SurveyMonkey process, along with Debbie Ward, a resident of Wildwood who does multimedia as her profession. And so we had a lot of help. Certainly you can find probably more, let's say, professional videos and other things out there that are done by production companies. But in a time of COVID-19 with budget restraints, I think we did the best we could, and hopefully you concur. So those are my opening remarks. In summary, we had a very positive response, and we hope that the response is something that was favorable to you, just in terms of what you were able to see. And again, I'll defer to Dr. Edwards right now.
Dr. Edwards?
I just have a quick question, Joe. And as a relative newcomer to this particular process, just to put it in context, how does this response rate of 775 folks compare with other surveys that have been done? How much, in other words, how much interest did this generate relative to other similar types of surveys that you've done and seen?
A very good question, Dr. Edwards. Up to this point, our most successful survey was one that was done in April by a consulting firm out of Cincinnati, Ohio, called Human Nature on Our Village Green. And we had 400 responses to that. And we were just tickled pink that we had that many. Prior to that, if we have in-person meetings, one of our most successful public input process meetings in person was 125 attendees. So in some regards, we've been, the COVID-19 and the availability of virtual surveys has at least brought more people to the table. I would never say it's a complete substitute for in-person. It's always nice to at least have one, if not more. But it's been very successful, I think, just in terms of gross numbers.
Back to you, Joe.
Well, on to the results. As was mentioned, there were a total of 24 questions. Several of those questions were open-ended, and so those are the written responses that habitate the end of Ms. Arnett's report. For the most part, there were at least 2 questions that we started with that maybe have nothing to do with other than just curiosity. And that is, are you a resident of Wildwood? 98% of the respondents were. And do you live in town center? 36% of the respondents did, which I think is important because obviously the decisions you all will recommend to the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council have some of the greatest impact on our residents of town center. Thereafter, we kind of got into the meat of the matter. And as I mentioned, in the department's analysis, there were 5 of the questions that seemed to not draw a clear consensus, or certainly not the overwhelming consensus in support. And the first of those was the boundary change that was recommended in the pond area of town center. That was the extension of the boundary along Manchester Road, out to Pond Road, north then to State Route 100, and back to the current boundary of town center. There was a majority that supported it, 52%, but there was also about 35% of the respondents that said no. The next was private alleys to public. About 45% said yes, that's something we should pursue. 33% said no. So in these instances, it's not that it was 49% to 51% or vice versa. There was a clear majority. It's just, again, relative to the others, which had over 2/3 support in many instances, these were the ones that were a little closer and lacked let's say, less of a consensus. The drive-through restaurants was probably the one that divided the opinions of our residents the most. 35% just want them in downtown and workplace. 27% want them only where they exist, and that's downtown district primarily. And then 18% said around State Route 100 or State Route 109. So suffice to say that drive-through facilities have been, for a period of time, an area of non-consensus, both at our Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. There was a consensus here that we should not expand it out to Route 100 and Route 109, and that direction appears to be consistent with the responses we received. The other area was the expansion of the neighborhood general into a previous location of downtown district designated properties. That's the Crestview Drive, Etherton Road area. About 55% said yes to changing from downtown district to neighborhood general district. About 32% said no. And then finally, in terms of residential uses, both multiple family and single family, in the cultural institutional overlay district, 33% said yes, residential uses should exist there. 50% said no. Now, none of these numbers equate to 100%. Some had no opinion at all, or there was no response in that particular survey. But those are the 5 that otherwise didn't have, let's say, as clear of a consensus as the others. Some were in this 93%, 67%, 71%, 92%. And again, we can certainly talk about those. But of the grouping of questions, those 5 appear to generate the most differences in responses. Dr. Jones, I'll turn it over for questions or comments.
So, okay, why don't we go one by one of the 5 you mentioned, Joe? So you want to repeat the first one and then open it up for comments if there any about that one.
The boundary change out to the pond area to neighborhood edge transition. 52% said yes, 35% said no. The rest had no comment or no opinion.
Questions and comments? Lindsay?
Joe, no information was provided to the survey recipients about the opinions of the property owners holding those properties, correct?
That's correct, ma'am.
Okay, the question was just posed in its kind of vacuum.
And we did get some comments back about context. And the assumption of the department is that everyone would take the opportunity to review the video, which did provide some context about town center and its history and the importance of it. And we were also hoping that people would spend a little time maybe investigating the website and learning more about town center. But yes, context, we didn't have the mechanism, nor I would consider the time to kind of give them a quick history of town center, so to speak.
Any other questions or comments? Dr. Edwards?
Joe, just looking through this, and I'm catching up because I was actually going by numbers, question numbers, not topics. But I think we're on question number 13. And I guess my question is, what do you make of the fact that there's an 88% response rate to this one? Not the highest, not the lowest. Were you trying to gauge interest in these items as well as the way the vote came out, so to speak?
Not necessarily. Again, just with the gross numbers of over, let's say, 618 completed surveys, we felt that, again, even though we may not have a perfect response, we were still getting information that was beneficial to the process. So I understand what you're saying, but I guess with our limited background, we were satisfied that we could give you percentages. And generally speaking, the percentages were pretty clear to make determinations whether you had support in the community or not.
Just to maybe sharpen my question a little bit more, and of the 775 total in this particular item, it was 687. And I'm not questioning how valid the item was as much as I'm wondering about the passion with which this particular item relative to the others was held. Did you come to any views on that one way or another?
Dr. Edwards, I guess I'd fall back to context. I think if the question maybe required a little bit more background, some felt they just weren't capable, or probably felt that they shouldn't answer it because they'd just be more like guessing.
Okay.
And so that's the context. And Kathy may be able to add some additional information with the chair's permission.
Kathy? And then we'll go.
Yeah, the other thing that I noticed is just as we progressed through the survey, the number of responses kept going down. So the first 2 questions, 775 people responded. And then by question 13, it was 687, then 686, then 666. So I think as people got further and further along, they were the 100 that abandoned ship kind of started doing it in the middle to the end. And I
Got
think
worn out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think by the last question, where not the short answer, but the regular one, we were down to 665 people. So I think it was a fatigue thing, if I were to guess.
Thank you.
Vicki,
Thank you. I think that I am a little confused because I thought that Joe, Mr. Vunic, you were talking about question number 4, and Dr. Edwards just said he thought we were talking about question 13. So could you please clarify which question we're actually talking about? Because I believe that it was 4, and if I'm wrong, I need to readjust my thinking. Thank you.
Joe?
My apologies to all. I do have the questions numbered. So we started with question number 4, which is the boundary change in the pond area. For the
That's
context.
the one we're talking about right now. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. Other comments?
I have a question.
Deborah?
Yeah, so I can't get my other devices open, so I can't get to the handout. Is it possible for Julian to put the questions up on the screen?
Kathy or Julian, can you go to page 5 of the report, which contains question 4?
I think Kathy and Travis are hosts on this one, so that falls to them.
So
Maybe just a
sorry,
minute.
I've got 2 different devices that won't up, so I can't. I don't know. If not, that's fine.
Well, I could read the
Thank you for your
questions.
help, Terry.
Okay, that'll work.
So question 4 relating to the pond boundary.
Uh-huh.
Do you support the addition of 7 properties to the town center boundary located to the west of the current boundary to Pond Road and south of State Route 100? There it is.
There it is.
Thank you.
Deborah, do you have a comment or a question?
And as I've mentioned, the graphics are courtesy of Mr. Jacquin, our deputy interim city administrator, and I thought they were very well done.
Any other questions or comments? You'll need to speak up with the share screen. I can only see 6 of you.
I guess my comment, and it kind of hit home when I opened it up and just made a look at it, and then I had some other people ask me questions, so that's why I went to open it up to look at the survey online. But my concern is because people had a hard time understanding the lingo and didn't really have a point of reference. I know you mentioned that earlier, but there were so many questions that stated that concern that I'm a little, I don't know, I'm a little confused about that. And if that's something that we need to worry about, and maybe take another shot at reposting the survey, or how does everybody else feel? Basically what I'm asking.
If I can add one thing.
That's first.
Oh, sorry.
Chair Loya?
You know, I think that the information is what it is, and we will provide it to the next level for consideration. I don't know that we should say, well, it has to have a threshold of 70 or 80% before it advances in the process. We went through the process of looking at each of these items in a pretty thorough process. And unfortunately, a lot of the respondents didn't have the luxury of the discussion and sometimes heated discussion regarding them. So I think that they remain valid. Perhaps they're not as well liked or appreciated or thought of as others, but in fact, the items we came up with did get an affirmative vote from the people that responded for what they know of it. So I don't know that, Joe, again, maybe this is you, Joe. Are we looking to eliminate something? Even with the close things, they've all gone to the affirmative of our intent. And I think the next level, which will be P and Z, will look at that weighted information in the surveys and go from there.
I guess
Joe?
with this last meeting, we were hoping that with the survey information from the public input process, if there were any changes, you would identify those tonight, act on them, and then we would incorporate them. So again, as I mentioned, we had 27 recommendations come out of the 2-year process, 2 of which were related to zoning requests. And so there were about 25 items that had been identified.
Right, but based on the questions we had, none of the questions that were presented received less than a favorable vote from the respondents, correct?
Only question 17 relating to the cultural institutional district and residential uses in that particular district. The town center update team supported retaining residential uses there. The responses from the survey indicated that there was a 50% of the respondents thought that that wasn't appropriate, and only 33% thought it was.
Okay, well, and in that case, obviously the respondents did feel that in a manner or a way that was opposite of our opinion. So perhaps we put greater emphasis on that. But though, I guess I'm just trying to say, at what margin do we say this is more popular or less popular, so it goes forward or it doesn't go forward? You know,
I think
and a good example is that, and we'll talk about the accurately placed land, I'm sure, at some point. A couple of the items we've already had the intent to advance, but they've already been turned down in the process. So, you know, and we agreed with those, we would at least put them in, advance it to the next level so that that process could consider what we had said and how they want to move forward.
And again, I recognize context is very, very important to help a respondent, the taker of the survey, understand the questions to the detail. And again, that's why we included the video at the start. All the meeting information was available on the website, and if someone wanted to watch the meetings themselves, they were available on the city's YouTube channel.
I just hate to minimize the work of this group, saying that we didn't do a thorough enough job because the public felt perhaps differently.
Vicki and then Lindsay.
Thank you. I realize that we are still talking about question 4, but I just wanted to address Chair Loyal. One of the things you mentioned was the accurately placed thing. And I think that that is apropos for question 21, when it asks, do people want the garages setting back 15 feet? That's I think that that applies to accurately placed and that area. And there was a large number of people, 85% response, and 61% of those people said they want garage doors to be brought back. And so I want to bring that up so that it's out there that's been that I did notice that.
Lindsay?
So I wanted to go back to Deborah's point, because what she's asking is whether or not the survey is valid based on the conversations she's had with people. And I think that's an important first point to address. I think my response would be that it is valid because all of the meetings have been public record and all of the information is available for people. So had anyone not fully understood one of the questions, there's plenty of information available to them to allow them to do the contextual research that Joe was talking about earlier. And I mean, that's just my feeling on the subject. I don't think that it's necessary to send it back out for comment, you know, because the questions were unclear.
Kathy?
Thank you. I want to also echo what Member Marion is saying. We did have people reach out who were taking the time to do the survey, and they had very intelligent questions. Some things that were unclear, we provided email or phone responses. I spoke with a handful of people. But I think that based on some of the short answer responses, they did understand the survey. There were questions on some things, but I think if we consider the fact that it took you all 2 years to have a full understanding and review, there's no way we can provide a member of the public who wants to spend 7 minutes on a survey the full context if they haven't taken the time themselves to be involved. I mean, I feel like they have a level of responsibility as well to, if they're going to take the survey, to understand it and try and educate themselves. We can't provide that full level unless they're going to go along with for the 2-year ride that you all have been on. So I think as the contact point for the public on the survey, based on the questions I was asked and emails I received, people did have a pretty good grasp on the survey itself. So thank you.
Elizabeth, and let me then, after Elizabeth, propose a way of proceeding. Elizabeth?
Yes, this is a general statement based on what Lindsay and Kathy have mentioned. Perhaps the no opinion that was listed here is because indeed people did not clearly understand, not through any fault of this team or the organization of the questions or the pictures that were given. My hunch is that indeed they were confused or didn't clearly understand and didn't want to make a decision of yes or no. So that's where their vote landed, is in the no opinion section. And I was also really read every one of these comments, and I don't know if I could reiterate them back to you at the moment, but because there was a number, but they tried to voice their opinion. And I'm sure that some of those no opinions were, several of them were listed in the questions that they stated or the statements that they made. I don't think it was any fault of this committee not making it as clear as possible, but there is a volume of information that we have learned over a 2-year period of time. Thank you.
Let me propose the following process for your consideration. If you go over each one of the 5 that Joe has already identified. We're on the first one. For any questions or comments, then an opportunity for any questions or comments of the remaining items on the questionnaire, including the open-ended comments. And then if people want to recommend that one of the recommendations be changed, we'll open the floor or the Zoom to motions to change a recommendation. Is that order of proceeding okay? Chair Loyal?
I think that's fine, unless anyone would have an opposition. Yeah, at least we get to move forward. That's great.
So now we're back on question 4, which is on page 5 of the report, dealing with the boundary changes that go to Pond Road. Are there any more questions or comments about it? If not, Joe, will you go to the second of the 5?
This is question 8. And question 8 dealt with the conversion of private alleys to public alleys that would be maintained by the city of Wildwood. 45% of the respondents recommended that that should occur per the recommendation of the Town Center Update team. 33% said no. Thank you.
Questions, comments? Michael?
So Joe, if we do this from the city's standpoint, this is a budget item that we'll have to deal with. If the city accepts the private to go public, it's more money for maintenance, correct?
Yes, sir.
And we're in the process of approving our budgets, you know, kind of identifying going forward. Is this something that will be discussed at council?
It'll first be discussed at the Planning and Zoning Commission as part of the overall package of recommendations the commission must consider. Depending on what the Planning and Zoning Commission would do, then it would go to City Council. But if you're worried about having money budgeted for 2021, if it were to be approved, and I don't know if it is or isn't, I'll certainly support the recommendation from the team. But by the time we would go through the process to convert private alleys to public maintained alleys, that is a subdivision process. And quite frankly, It'll probably take us most of 2021 to complete the commission and council process. Then if it is part of something, the subdivision process. So we'll program it next fall if it's favorably acted upon.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Lindsay?
So one thing I did want to mention is that while I appreciate that there was a lot of work put into the graphics, when we were debating this originally, I believe it was said that it's probably around a mile of roads total. But if you didn't closely look at the graphic, you could assume it was all the red or a lot more than a mile total worth of roads. I'm not saying it would change people's opinion, but I think the graphic might be a little bit misleading on this one, or a little bit confusing if people didn't look at it very carefully.
Ed?
When the alleys were built, were they built to a standard that would be the same quality of a standard that the city would have designated for maintenance?
They were built to a city specification. They're not at a street specification, but they did not need to be because of the amount of traffic on any given day. But they were built to a fairly high specification for an alley. And to Miss Marion, with the assistance of Kathy, Travis, and Julian, we'll see if we can make that a little bit more descriptive as we send it on to the other decision makers to consider. Thank you.
Ray?
I have a question. Actually, it's a broader question, but this is a good place to bring it up. If I understand correctly, in all but one of the cases, the vote, so to speak, if we can frame it that way, went along with the recommendations of this committee. And to that extent, I wonder if people were deferring to the fact that we have been at this for 2 years. And if anything, that's a vote of confidence in this committee and in the administration in general, that what we're recommending, even though they may not entirely understand it, and we can interpret no opinion any number of ways, but even though they may not entirely understand it, if they didn't entirely understand it, they felt as though we must, because we've been at it for such a long period of time, and we had their best interests at heart. And again, those of us on this team really represent the community. So a number of us have had conversations for the last 2 years along the way. So that's the way I'm taking it, unless somebody feels differently. And that goes to this question about the private alleys, because you could kind of cut this both ways. And I think Michael's comments are appropriate, that there is a cost factor built in here. So you're sort of making a close call on this one. But again, I come back to my original point that maybe they were, even in a close call, they were kind of deferring to the wisdom, so to speak, of this team. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Kevin?
Forgive me if this has been answered already, but I think the issue of the public funding for the back alleys might have come up or been discussed by the committee before I joined. But has any analysis been done as to the cost impact itself, other than the fact that it is a cost increase? Is there like a magnitude that can be associated with it, just for my own benefit? Kind of building on what Ray said, my assumption would just be that this question was answered a little bit more negatively, just because it is going to obviously have an increased cost, and in the current environment, people are probably less likely to support that kind of thing generally. But I just wasn't familiar with this specific issue, and if there had been any prior committee discussion of the actual magnitude of impact, other than just a general, yes, there will be cost. But does anyone have the answer to that, or is there any detail on that you could provide?
Mr. Lux, I don't have a specific number for the mile of private alley. That'll be something that will be developed as we head toward the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. But typically, I believe a mile of just typical subdivision street, there's about $5,000 worth of expense per year. And that includes salting, snow and ice removal, general maintenance, things like that.
Okay, and then in terms of, you mentioned that there might need to be some upgrades or some work done to the street to get it to public grade, meaning quality. Is there any kind of estimate as to whether lighting needs to be installed, sewers or drainage needs to be put in or anything like that? Or is that 5,000 a year just kind of a general number, best estimate at this point kind of thing?
It's a general number at this point, but all of the alleys were part of the original project development. So there is lighting, there is stormwater management, there is landscaping in some instances. So we treated the alleys just as if they were public streets, so to speak. They are at a lesser construction standard because, again, they don't have the traffic of a public street. But typically what the city does, if it does accept a public street for, a private street for public maintenance, we require the subdivision to make the upgrades before the acceptance is finalized.
Okay. Appreciate the context. Thank you.
And then Deborah. Floor is yours, Dan.
Okay, thanks. Joe, my concern about this particular question is we keep referring to a mile worth of road, but we spell it out that any future alleys would be treated the same way. So, I mean, this is kind of an open-ended deal. Do we want to put a box around that some way? Do we want to limit it to existing roads? Or I would like to propose to the team, and I was very much a part of this discussion when we had it, does this belong in our recommendation? And if 6 or 8 or 10 of us say yes, then fine, but I would almost make a motion to remove number 8 from our presentation.
Let me propose that that motion be in order once we have reviewed the questionnaire and commented on it. And we'll come back to you, Dan. If you want to make the motion at that point, then let's do it.
Okay.
Mr. Roughton, what I would say about the future, for the most part, we are, as a city, moving away from alleys. The most recent action of the Planning and Zoning Commission was the Reserve, a town center residential project with no alleys. We'll assume control, if this were to be adopted, of a certain number of alleys in Main Street Crossing and the villages at Brightleaf. But after that, I just don't see very many alleys being proposed. The rear entry garages just doesn't seem to be garnering the support across the board necessary to have it as a component of future projects.
Thank you.
Deborah and then Michael.
Yeah, Joe, in the back of my head somewhere, I know at council we did something with the alley. Did we just go ahead and accept one of them as a public street? Do you remember what happened?
Yes, it's the Windsor Crest subdivision over on the northwest quadrant of Route 100 and Route 109. And what the city did is it provides general maintenance of the alleys, snow and ice removal, et cetera. And then the subdivision took over landscaping maintenance at the pedestrian bridge and the trail area around it. So it was kind of a no net loss, no net gain. What we spent to take over the alleys for general maintenance, we were able to save on lawn maintenance.
So basically, we've already started a precedent, correct?
There is one out there. We are maintaining a set of private alleys already.
Thank you.
Michael?
Yeah, a couple of points. As far as the private alleys, it's like we have private streets or alley access ways inside a town center. And I think that the action was probably shouldn't have that within a town center. But I can see if I were taking the survey and I had a private alley and I was paying HOA fees and the question came up that the city could take this over, I would definitely vote yes for it. So, you know, you got to weigh it a little bit. As far as rear entry drives and alleyways for what property we have left in town center, I don't think it's feasible for the topography of the landscape that we have. We're trying to preserve trees, woodline, creek erosion type tactics, and putting in more pavement just is counter to what we're trying to do, I think, from the Planning Commission. So I'll just offer that up. And so I'm not sure we will, for what's left to develop, that alleys even make any sense, as Joe was discussing. I think it's more based on topography than anything else.
Chief Loyal?
And I was very much involved in this discussion when it was originally discussed, and that was well-attended discussions as well by the community. One of the things that really falls back on, it's a limited number of alleys in the roadway system within town center only. The master plan calls for the town center street system to be maintained by the city, and this has just been avoiding that process since, I guess, the plan was developed or since it's been revised. I agree. The sentiment regarding the type of housing that would require additional alleys and rear entries doesn't seem to be there. So, I think we had good discussions, made good valid decisions when we discussed it almost 2 years ago now. And I don't think we've had an influx of additional alleys. So I think we should proceed.
Michael?
No, I
Get that
totally
unmute button. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Which Michael?
Michael's has the floor.
I just wanted to make a quick comment, that's all. And I apologize, Dr. Jones, this kind of falls off of, it's not in direct response to number 8. But looking back, Kathy made the comment earlier, we had 2 years that we went over all these things. And we as a town center update team did not agree 100% on any one of these exact issues. So just keep that in mind when we're reviewing these responses, that it's okay that we don't all 100% agree. Let's figure out, these were the comments of the residents, and we had made our plan. We're kind of comparing that to that as we go along and make our decisions. Apologize, that was a little out of order, Dr. Jones.
That's not at all. It's very appropriate. Any other questions or comments about question 8? If not, Joe, will you go on to the third of the 5?
Yes, sir. The next item related to drive-through facilities for restaurants. As you know, from our discussion that occurred a while back, drive-through restaurants are only limited to, drive-through facilities in association with restaurants is limited to the downtown district. There has been some discussion about expanding it out to Route 100, Route 109 in the workplace district. The town center update team did not support that, and there seems to be limited support in the community.
This is question 9 on pages 12 and 13 in the report. Other comment, or Scott?
Yes, I noticed, well, first of all, that decision we made, I believe was brought up by a very passionate and prominent member of the committee who's no longer with us. And the vote was like 7-5. And, I was, I think, a little confused or conflicted on how to vote on it. Since we've gone through a pandemic, I think it's apparent how critical drive-throughs are to success of some facilities. And again, there were a lot of comments, the vote standing aside, there were a lot of comments about drive-throughs. So I would, that's an area I would like to have revisit or somehow clarify our intent on that vote.
Vicki and then Vince.
Thank you. When I look at these numbers, how I interpret the data is that when you look at the questions, it's along State Route 100, in the downtown district, and the workplace. And those 3 things kind of all overlap each other in my mind. And so when I look at those numbers, it looks to be about 50%. So I would agree with Mr. Risdale that after having gone through the pandemic, I supported drive-throughs in the workplace the first time, and I would support them again the second time. I think they have a place, and I think that it would be up to planning and zoning to be able to tell them where they could place those drive-throughs on the property. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Chief Loyal.
Just a question regarding this question. I don't remember specifically what our determination was, and we really weren't asking for confirmation from the citizens about a decision we had made. I almost wonder if we're asking them the question that should have been asked when we discussed it at committee time, if you will. And if you can refresh my memory, Joe, what we decided on this. So I don't know if they just affirmed what we decided or if the opinion changed what we thought.
Joe?
Well, as team member Risdale mentioned, there was a close vote, but it was presented to the team. The context is that we have a number of properties, outlots along Route 109. And Mr. Jacquin, our economic development manager, he's wearing 2 hats these days, has been contacted by a number of interested parties, and almost all are very optimistic about the property if they could have a drive-through facility. And without a drive-through facility, interest lags on those properties. And so the thought is that if there's a concern about how they're designed, how they look, those are all things that the Planning and Zoning Commission can address through the ordinances and the site development plan. But for the most part, the downtown district does not lend itself as well now as it did at the start of the town center planning process in 1998 to drive-through facilities. A lot of the property's been absorbed. And I would concur. I think anything that the pandemic has taught us is that if we can have some convenience and avail ourselves to services without necessarily having to go into a location.
What was the determination from our close vote, that we would leave it as it was? Or
leave it as it was.
Okay, so essentially we weren't asking the people if they agreed with our decision to leave things as they were. We were kind of open-ended to your point, saying, where do you think we should have drive-throughs?
Well, our question was very simple. Where would you support drive-through in association with restaurants?
Right, but it wasn't, we weren't asking for affirmation of our decision. We were kind of going back to the drawing board, which I think is valid, but I just was confused.
Yeah, in a certain degree, we got a lot more opinions than I thought we would.
Kevin?
Also in connection with this question, I can't recall from at the time when I filled it out, but the way that the question was structured, could you answer individually to each of these options, or was it just pick one out of the 5? Because I think some people, if they don't care if they're on 100 and 109 or in the workplace or the workplace districts, but then had to pick between one of the 2, that might have skewed the results. Because if you could look at each of these individually, you might have had a lot of people saying yes, 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 rather than only picking the one that they most wanted it. So I was kind of questioning the value of the information that this actually provides. Because obviously nowhere is an all-exclusive answer. Only where they exist is all exclusive, but on the others, it's kind of pick a preference as opposed to a mutually exclusive answer. So I was a bit confused by the feedback on this question.
Joe or Kathy?
I'll take that one, thank you. They were required to only select one. We had discussed when we wrote the question, the potential for allowing them to rank their preference, but decided that probably would cause a little more confusion. So we kind of forced them to make a decision. But as we discussed the results too, when some of them work hand in hand. So if they picked in the downtown district, or if they picked in the downtown and workplace, those could be matched together. If you picked in downtown, you may not want them in the workplace, but when we kind of tried to come up with some quantifiable results, yes, that showed that more than 50%, and in addition to the state routes, which would be workplace district, more than 50 and almost 60%, I think, more than 60% support them in locations beyond where they are.
Okay, yeah, and I appreciate that view. I think that is a good distinction to make. So as opposed to picking individual locations, it's just that 60% of people were in favor of expanding the drive-through areas is kind of the way I would look at the results of that question. Then is that a fair statement?
I agree. I think in our discussions as staff, that's kind of what we had assimilated as well. And I also believe that, you're right, Chair Loyal, it is a little different than how we worded some of the other questions, but you all as a team, this wasn't a unanimous vote or a unanimous discussion. There was debate amongst you all, and there's a lot of debate and different answers for people that call City Hall. And so, maybe we took a little bit of a liberty here, but we wanted to gather all that information. If we're going to ask the public their opinion, then we wanted to make sure we were really getting their opinion. So.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Well,
Any other questions or comments about question 9? Chair Loyal? Your mic.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Can we footnote when we present this to the next level, which will be P and Z, or Michael can be the mouthpiece for us, that did occur. We had 60% of the respondents say they thought there needed to be a change from what currently existed, and then the details of that could be worked out. So I think some of these questions may require a little footnote as to how the answers were evolved in the process.
Thank you. Any other questions about question 9 or comments about it? If not, Joe, would you, I'm sorry, Michael?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say something here. So the lot size for most of these workplace areas and the depth of property that's actually zoned for it kind of only allow for drive-through type restaurants. We're not going to put a large office building here or something like that because the lots are not large enough. And then along Manchester, you have these really skinny lots, which would require a combination of a couple lots and assemblage in order to develop something. So I think what we're seeing is most of the time in planning commission is we get a lot of pushback for drive-throughs. There's a considerable consensus not to do a drive-through, but to have some of these places not allow it basically does not allow the property to ever develop. So that's kind of the dichotomy here that we're faced with. So I think we let this go through and we'll push it probably all the way through council and see what they want to do. But unfortunately, the reality is if you own in town center, your property is probably not worth anything in some of these areas because you're never going to sell it. It's just the way that the development industry works. And I'll just take my planning chair hat off and use my engineering chair. I don't think anybody's ever going to come touch these properties. Like Joe says, there's interest, but once they say no drive-through, they say, okay, we're going to go on down the street. So that's just the reality of it. As a community, we can say we don't want the drive-throughs, and that's fine. That's an opinion, but it really hamstrings these properties for development.
Chair Loyal?
Well, and I think, Michael, to your point, that was probably the biggest role of this entire team, was to look at what occurred 25 years ago and what remains valid and what needs to be changed, updated, or altered in some way. So I think that's perfectly appropriate for us to make a recommendation like that.
Vicki?
I think that sometimes when you say drive-through, people, they picture in their mind a McDonald's drive-through with all the bright lights and the 2 lanes. And I don't think that drive-throughs have to be that way. And I think that the planning department can can ensure that they don't look that way. They can put them on the backs of buildings. So, you know, I think that after this pandemic and people see how things go, I think that it needs to go on through. So.
Other questions or comments about question 9? Hearing none. Joe, would you go on to the 4th of the 5?
This is question 13. And question 13 dealt with the decision of the team to change the downtown district designation for 10 properties in the vicinity of the intersection of Etherton Road and Crestview Drive, which someday will be Main Street, to neighborhood general, which would allow a range of residential type uses. The responses were generally positive, over 50%. In fact, 55% said yes, that change was acceptable. Thank you.
Questions or comments about question 13? Going once, twice, gone. The 5th of the 5, Joe.
And the last one relates to the Cultural Institutional Overlay District. As you know, while the discussion was underway regarding the permitted activities in all of the town center land use districts, there was a multiple family proposal that had been submitted for the 4+ acre site just south of the YMCA, which is in the Cultural Institutional Overlay District. There was an outpouring of non-support for that multiple family development. So the team had a real life example and certainly had an opportunity to hear both sides of the issue. The team kept residential uses in the Cultural Institutional Overlay District, and the response to the survey was 50% of the respondents thought that that was not appropriate.
Mike?
Got too many screens going on. Got to get my mouse on the right screen. To unmute myself. Joe, I'm just curious on that question, kind of alluding way back to what Deborah commented before about the clarity of some of the questions. Do you think this question was the single family in that component of the cultural versus the multifamily? Do you think that had a variable in the equation to the answers that we saw?
Well, the question both identified single and multiple family and did state that they would only be authorized with a conditional use permit, that extra layer of protection, so to speak. But still there was a 50% negative response. So we did identify both types of residential uses, Mr. Sedley.
Michael, Lee.
Yes, I think we've got a little bit of carryover from that development that was going in on the south side over by the Y. We had a huge group of people, probably over 1,000 do not support, for planning commission on that apartment complex. And I think we've got a little carryover from that. One thing I would say is we probably identified that was not the right site for that type of an activity. But with the community college and this thing actually being successful, they're going to need some sort of student housing. I know it's mostly a drive-to facility for local people, but I think they were looking at it as a viable solution for the long term. If the community college was going to succeed, they might offer some hotels. And I know Joe and I have talked about this, that there are other sites within this area that would work for that type of a use. So I'm a little torn between this one because the question came out right in the heat of the battle of that other apartment complex. And I'm not sure we have accurate results here.
Elizabeth and then Ed.
Thank you. Mr. Lee, you wrote a letter responding to that issue. I think you were in transit in an airport. And I kept that because I think what you expressed there was there were other alternatives for housing for the college. And that, I believe that you mentioned west off of Highway 109 and Pond Road. Am I correct?
I'd have to go back and look at that, but I think
It was,
there was an extension drive that hasn't been built yet here.
that is correct.
And that's, yeah, working your way away from, you know, the activity that's to the south. And I think it would be more isolated. I think that would be a ideal spot for something like this. And I wouldn't want to exclude that for a future. As
And
we're
I
trying
tend
to get the other road through there as well, which would be a good starting point for that.
And I tend to agree with that statement. You and I didn't talk about that after you wrote it, but since we're talking about that issue right now, I think you're going to find in this area, south of the YMCA, that one piece of property, you're going to find the same reaction of residents, and not just residents that live closer to it, but there were many, many residents that called in and that expressed that they like the YMCA and they don't want it. They don't want any more traffic there, I think.
Right. I think I agree with you. I don't think that's a good site for it. The infrastructure doesn't support it. So, and we're not going to make the improvements to Highway 109 in order to support it. So
No.
I think there's other locations within this zoning though. So I wouldn't want to, you know, completely exclude it. So that's, I guess, I don't know how we handle this as a group.
Ed and then Lindsay.
I just wanted to point out that in the future, there's an obligation to extend to Old Manchester Road, which would also be a way of relieving some of the traffic congestion. So it shouldn't be totally ruled out. With that roadway being built as part of a development, it really changes the whole view of the project.
Lindsay?
I wanted to point out, to make sure that everyone saw what Kathy put in the chat, that the group's original decision was actually to change something that was permitted to permitted only by conditional use. And I don't know if that was clear in the phrasing of the question, that the team's recommendation was actually to make it more stringent.
Elizabeth?
Yes, Lindsay, thank you. Lindsay, what you're speaking about is actually number 17, which relates to the cultural institutional. I know I'm jumping from 15 to 17. And I had a comment that wasn't clear in that statement, that question. May I proceed?
We are talking about question 17 though, to clarify.
Yes. And that complements her comment that she just made, that Lindsay just made. And that is that if anyone didn't understand what that meant, it meant that we were suggesting that we change it from permitted by right to a more stringent, as she said, a conditional use permit, more stringent. And I don't think that was clear in that particular question. If someone was not familiar with what we were trying to express there, it didn't say, do you support changing the multiple single family from a permitted by right to a conditional use permit in cultural institutional districts. So I think that wording needs to be changed.
Yeah, I think my point was similar to Elizabeth's. If you didn't have the background, you might think that we were changing it from not permitted to permitted by conditional use.
Exactly.
Which could have massively influenced the answers to the question.
That is correct. Thank you.
Mike,
What do the other members think about that?
Mike has his hand up first, Elizabeth, then we'll give other people an opportunity to respond to your question. Mike?
I would just comment that, again, based on our recommendation, thank you, Kathy, for pointing that out because I couldn't remember what we had decided. We pulled it out and said it's permitted by conditional use, right? So it permitted. So as to Michael's point and kind of to Ed's point of, if it supports it and the planning and zoning and the council says, hey, this is what we need, and maybe that's when that road to Old Manchester actually exists, then it's fine. And I would echo that the public comment kind of supports what we decided to say, hey, whoa, let's pull the reins back on this. And if council and planning and zoning feels it's a fit, then it's a go. So I would just echo that I think what we've decided as a team, the public has kind of supported that.
Michael Williams.
Yeah, up to a point, but the answers that we received from question 17 are just contra to what we're trying to do here. So
Exactly.
that I don't think they understood the question or they don't understand the conditional use permit process.
Yet,
Elizabeth, you want to reply to that, Elizabeth, and then
I'd like to reply to Mr. Lee's comment. I believe that wholeheartedly, that if it had expressed, do you support a change in the uses multiple single family, I'm not phrasing it correctly, but, and say from permitted by right to a conditional use permit with more restrictions, or maybe not the word restrictions, but something like that. I think that would have been clearer, and people would have, they were saying no to this because I don't think they understood what it meant.
Ray?
Yeah, it sounds to me like we're all kind of saying the same thing. We've already had this debate once. We voted on it. We put this before the public. This is the only item that they disagreed with of all the items we recommended. And it's our belief, if I'm hearing all the discussion, that the reason they disagreed may have something to do with the way the question was worded. And one could argue that that further underscores their confidence in the committee. And if they heard the debate that we had and the reason we voted for it, they would be supporting this one too. So what I'm hearing in all of this, again, we've already had this discussion. We voted on it a certain way, that maybe we ought to just go ahead and stick with our original recommendation, despite this kind of equivocal response from the public.
Any other questions or comments about number 17? Michael?
Is Mr. Edwards wanting to make a motion? I would second it if you want to do that.
Well,
we'll have the motions after we've finished the discussion of the question.
And just to respond to Mr. Lee, I don't know that there's a motion to be made because we're just saying we're going to stick with our original recommendations. To the extent that we would just put this in with all the others. That would be my response.
Any other questions or comments about number 17? Remainder of the survey, are there any questions or comments about any of the other items? Deborah?
Yeah, I don't know if we're there or not, but the other thing that jumped out in my mind that seems to be quite a bit of debate about was the street priorities. Did we discuss that before we decide if we're taking any votes, or is that out of order?
Joe?
And I assume you're describing question 5.
I don't have them in front of me, so I'm not sure what question it is. I'm sorry.
Well, question 5 dealt with the street network, and it read, do you agree with the prioritization of street improvements within the town center? The top 7 town center streets for improvement are, excuse me, Center Avenue, New College Avenue, Generations Avenue, Etherton Road, Main Street, Taylor Road, and Eastgate Avenue. And the response was 67%, basically said they agreed with it.
I guess what was sticking out in my mind were the different comments that they made in the narrative portion of the survey. I think there was a lot of comments supporting Etherton Road, but then there were comments on a couple of the other streets that they didn't think that one should be considered at all. And so there were several comments in there regarding street priorities. So I didn't know if anybody wanted to discuss that or not. If you lump it together, it sounds like it's a pretty overwhelming response, but when you start looking at the individual comments, just something that kind of jumped out at me.
Scott? And then Elizabeth.
Yes, I noticed too that there were a lot of comments regarding the priority given to Generations Avenue. And I think probably we could note the tremendous amount of citizen feedback we got, as well as any other traffic counts and so forth that would support that the priority given to Generations Avenue. The only other comments or item I noticed on the comments, while it doesn't apply to any specific question, was that there were a lot of negative comments about trees being planted in the sidewalk, and especially on the stretch between Schnooks and Deerbergs on Manchester. I was very happy to see that west of the Rotary that the method of complying with street trees has been a lot more flexible, and so that's again, that wasn't any specific question, but I hope we continue to address that area that drew a lot of negative comments.
Elizabeth?
I too noticed in not so much the questions, but the comments about the roadways, and how many people made comments about the order in which they thought they needed to be addressed. So I don't know if the team wants to take another look at that. I mean, we did an extensive study of this over time. I just would be interested in your comments about, do you think it needs to be looked at in a different way? Especially if I hear Etherton Road, and I'm assuming that's from Manchester to where it ends on the south side. And the fact that I don't know when the timing of the Crestview is going to be widened and used, which would create more traffic on Etherton. That seemed to be the one that I looked at and heard comments more about. I'm interested in your input as the team members.
Before I go to Dan, Kathy, did you want to say something?
I think Joe and I unmuted at the same time, but my comment was going to just be statistically. When we look at the responses to the survey, 718 people responded and 480 said they supported it. 58 people said they did not support. That's 8% of respondents. 57 people filled out the form or put in a short answer. So that means, and then if we take the number of those that are Etherton Road, it's an even smaller percentage. So we can footnote it in the final report, we can make comments about it, but I think what it boils down to is 2% or 4% of the respondents wanted Etherton Road a higher priority, which means if we defer back to the overall statistics, 66% of the respondents think the order is correct. So I just wanted to do some math there. Thank you.
Dan, and then Chief Loyal.
And I support Kathy's analysis 100%. It's one of the strongest responses that we've had on any of the questions. in favor of our recommendation. So I think the numbers speak for themselves.
Elizabeth?
I really appreciate Kathy giving us that statistical. I'm sorry.
Vince was next.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I've had my hand up for a while.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Lindsay.
The
Vince?
only comment I was going to make regarding what Kathy, are we even certain that they were referring to Etherton Road in town center? Because it can't, in Wildwood, it can be a bit confusing. You have about 5 or 6 options.
That's
depending
true.
on where you live. So
Yeah.
that just may be a qualifier.
That was my point as well, that they're referring to Woods Road, but the 20 feet of Woods Road that's in town center was redone as part of the streetscape. So I think the people who made the comments may be confused that this was limited to streets within the town center.
Other comments or questions about any of the other items, including question 5? Hearing none, then let's go to opportunity for if anybody wants to make a motion about any one of the recommendations. Dan, you were first in line.
Listening to my team members, I'm fine leaving that question and recommendation the way it is.
Elizabeth?
I agree as well after listening to Kathy's remarks about the statistics of that. I looked at Etherton Road, which is in town center, and I wasn't sure when the time frame was going to be. I think I repeating myself. The time frame of working on Crestview and Main Street. I wasn't sure. I was thinking that part of Etherton Road, and that's true. It could be some other section of Etherton Road, and I'm okay with the way it stands.
Just to note, we've actually now moved to item 6 on the agenda, which is review and final action on proposed modifications. So this is, again, an opportunity for anybody to make a motion to change one of the recommendations. Chief Loyal?
Not seeing any recommendation to change, I would make a recommendation to move forward with the appropriate transmission movement recommendation, the next step of the process, with the appropriate refinement of the data. However, I guess the team would decide it needs to be done, but take the next step in the process.
Mike, I assume that means you second it? Seconded by Mike. Discussion. Thirded by Dan before you have the discussion. Discussion of the motion. Seeing no further discussion, let's move to a vote. Kathy, will you do the roll call?
Yes, sir. Member Roughton?
Aye.
Member Lux?
Aye.
Member Edwards?
Aye.
Member Risdell?
Aye.
Member Marion?
Aye.
Member Broyles?
Aye.
Member Sedlak?
Aye.
Member Cohn?
Yes.
Member Helfrey?
Yes.
Member Lee?
Yes.
Member Hoffman?
Yes.
Chair Loyal?
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Well done, team. Joe, where do we go from here?
To the bar.
Joe, are you buying or not? This is the
Only we
item on
could.
the agenda, input from team members. So one input is to go to the bar. Is there any other comments that any member of the team wants us to make at this point? Joe, is there any comments that you wish to make?
Mike Sedlak had a comment.
Chief Loyal.
Mike Sedlak.
Oh, Mike. Okay, thank you.
No, I just was going to say, gang, we've been doing this for 2 years. We've had a lot of good discussion. A lot of times, I think with this committee,
a lot of times we haven't been on the same page, and I think that's good. I think that's different perspective, which I think is good in today's society. But seeing the survey, and I get what you say, Councilmember McCutcheon, from earlier, that maybe there wasn't as clarity, for some of the residents. Had we put different links and things, I think that would have just confused them some more. But seeing that they supported what we as a team decided over a 2-year period is kind of refreshing in my mind as being a business owner in town center to say, hey, we did do a good job with what we had at the task at hand to do. And again, we had differing perspective. We had a lot of discussion, which I think was good. But seeing it all come together here at this meeting, I just applaud all of our team members that I think we did a very good job in echoing what the residents said based on the survey.
Deborah?
No, I agree. I think the team did an excellent job. I was just reporting back the information and the questions that I received from residents, struggling with interpreting the questions and some of the terminology. And I think you could see that somewhat in some of the comments by the residents who filled out the questionnaire as well. No, I think the team did an excellent job. We did have a lot of good debate. It's taken us 2 years to go through this. I think we went through it very thoroughly. I think maybe there was only that one item that was really close to toss up as to whether it was supported or not. So I think we did a great job. I was only bringing back comments that was given to me from residents.
Before recognizing Chief Loyal to make any final comments on behalf of the chair of the committee, Joe, is there anything that you wish to add at this point?
Well, just several things, Dr. Jones, with the permission of the chair. The next step, the Department of Planning will, for the most part, take the recommendations and put them into a final letter that will be forwarded to the Planning and Zoning Commission to begin their review. The Planning and Zoning Commission, from my perspective, and I think Chair Lee will agree, that we'll probably do some type of work session, and you'll all be invited to attend so you can participate in that discussion. And if you don't want to participate, at least hear the questions that may be raised by the other Planning and Zoning Commission members that aren't part of this team. So there'll be another opportunity for you to kind of participate as we bring those final recommendations forward from our 2-year process. Secondly, I think from at least Mr. Newberry, Ms. Arnett, and I's perspective, we couldn't have been happier with the process. Certainly you always wish it would have been shorter. I know some of you were probably getting weary of the monthly meetings, but when people asked, did they take their time and did they really take it seriously? I don't think there can be any other answer than unequivocally yes. And we do want to thank you for your 2 years of time. It's like we become friends, not only team members, and certainly it'll be hard not to see some of you in the future, but hopefully we will. And I think we all want to just wish you the very best of the upcoming holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Chief Loyal.
The only thing I would say to everyone is thank you so much, not only for your hard work and your persistence, but also for the honor of allowing me to serve as the chair of this. To the city staff, we couldn't have done it without the support that you provided us and guidance. Who knows the direction we would have ended up without you guys keeping us corralled. So thank you very much. Dr. Jones, your expertise in keeping this under control and directing us the way is greatly appreciated, and we're benefited from your experience in that arena. So I'm sorry we didn't get to meet each other more in person as a result of the COVID situation, but I hope in the future we'll have the opportunity to work again together or see each other in our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you. There's floor is open for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mike, seconded by Ed. All in favor, aye.
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 Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy
Happy
holiday.
holidays.
Happy holidays. Thank you.
Joe, can you hang out for a second?
Yes, ma'am.
Are we all set for tomorrow?
Yes, ma'am.